Hey, Margie here. Did you know that more than 95,000 synthetic chemicals are approved for use in the United States, but only a small percentage have actually been tested by regulatory agencies? Most of us are exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals every day in our air, food, water, personal care products, homes, and offices. And these chemicals can have major negative effects on our bones. The good news is that when it comes to these toxins, small changes to your lifestyle can make a huge difference for your bones and overall health. And that's what we're going to delve into today with our special guest, Dr. Aly Cohen. And Dr. Cohen is a board certified rheumatologist and integrative medicine physician recognized nationally for her expertise in environmental health and medical education. She's the author of Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them. And you can learn more about her bio in the show notes. But in this episode, she really takes us through some practical things that we can all do to reduce the toxins we're exposed to on a daily basis. So this is full of great information. So stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Cohen. I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast. I absolutely love your new book, and you have so much information to share. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Margie.
Well, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but before we even get started, I think it's just good to just define what toxins are, because a lot of people hear the word toxins and they just are confused, and or what are toxic chemicals in particular?
Well, in a hat tip to my scientific community, I will say that the word toxins, as related to chemicals that are not alive, obviously, that's not really the real use of the word toxins. Toxins originally came from living creatures. So you think like snake venom is a toxin, whereas chemicals tend to be called toxics in the chemical industry world. But that being said, most people understand that toxins are not good for you, no matter where they come from. And essentially, they're compounds that have been designated as harmful to either human health or animal health. And so, yeah, these are either man made or human made compounds, but they can also be natural substances as well.
Okay, so before we dive in, I think it's so important to understand why you're so passionate about this work. And I just love your story. So if you wouldn't mind sharing how you got involved from being a rheumatologist, how you got involved in this area of medicine and why you're getting the word out and it means so much to you. So why don't you talk about your story? Because it's really interesting because you didn't start out this way. You didn't grow up this way, but here you are. So why don't you start there so people understand, why this is your mission?
Sure. And no, I did not grow up doing what I'm doing now. I can assure you I grew up on Flintstones vitamins and ham packaged, processed meats and Welsh rarebit from whatever, Stouffer's every night. I mean, it was just, I look back and, it was an interesting time. But what happened was I was newly trained rheumatologist. I had done my internal medicine residency in New York, and then I'd gone on to a fellowship in rheumatology, which is basically autoimmune diseases and joint conditions and a bunch of other things, Lyme disease, all that. And I was practicing now in the suburbs in New Jersey with two young kids and a dog. My dog was a 4.5-year-old golden retriever. He's our firstborn, so to speak. And he became sick. And I didn't know why, but he became really sick over a short period of time and essentially was diagnosed by a few vets as having autoimmune hepatitis, where his immune system had been triggered to attack his own liver. And this is not only rare in dogs, but certainly rare in golden retrievers. And this was super heartbreaking. I mean, I was really beside myself now, knowing how young he was, how rare this was. And here I am with two young kids in the suburbs thinking, is there something I should know about in terms of my own family? And so I started to research what was he eating, what was he drinking, what was the quality of his food, what was the plastic toy in his mouth, and what could that be doing to his body? Flea and tick spray and lotions and everything you can think of. I really was observing and looking into and researching. And what I unveiled, which was so shocking and took me on a 15-year journey, was essentially that there's no regulations for animals, let alone for humans, human beings in the US. And yet, not just about regulations, there's no required research to look at the safety or toxicity of pretty much any of the chemicals that go into the products that we love, that are personal care and our cleaning products, even the food industry chemicals. So it was so eye opening and so shocking that here I was, a practicing physician, even fellowship trained in immunology, and here I'm seeing so much information about how the hormones are affected, how immune system's affected, and it just took off as a learning project in the beginning, but now has culminated in pretty much 15 years, 2 textbooks, and now this consumer book on environmental health and how our environment plays a key role in human health.
Wow. Well, it's really great. Your new book is just so amazing and so full of great information. I just really kudos to you for another amazing book. But this is sort of a how-to, which I think is we'll get into it, but it's so helpful. Okay, so my audience is very interested in bone health, and as a rheumatologist, you work with, you see a lot of people with osteoporosis, osteopenia, but how do these chemicals affect our bones? Like, why is this something that, I mean, everybody I think needs to hear this conversation, but for people with issues with bone health and osteoporosis, how does this directly affect our bone health?
Yeah, so bones are a living tissue. Bones are constantly remodeling. They're growing, they're breaking down. When we fracture a bone, we have a remodeling process where certain cells go in and kind of repair and patch those fractures. When we get beyond menopause and we don't have some of those hormones related to specifically bone strength, we have to kind of fight harder for those bones to stay stronger through weight bearing exercises, your audience knows. But what's interesting is these chemicals, literally thousands of them, but the ones that have been most well studied as hormone disruptors or endocrine disrupting chemicals, and what I've written about in 2 books before, is really an interesting area when it comes to bones, osteoporosis, osteopenia, because we know that not just hormones of fertility, growth and development, brain health, male and female genitalia in utero, all of those are hormone derived or managed, I should say, processes, but certainly bone development as well, bone maintenance and bone strength. And when we're talking about chemicals that have the ability to affect hormones like estrogens and mimic them even at low levels, even block androgens and other male hormones, we can see that there's a very important problem that could be, happening when we're exposed to these chemicals, especially on a day-to-day basis over the course of a lifetime. So I'm not talking about necessarily occupational exposures or, manufacturing spills or something of that nature, but really low level exposures over time, chemicals that mimic hormones and disrupt their normal physiology, their normal signaling process. And we're also talking about, parathyroid hormone, and that affects calcium, vitamin D balance, thyroid hormone, which affects metabolism, that also plays into bone. So the goal is not just to think about chemicals affecting those areas that have gotten a lot more attention, puberty being earlier onset, fertility, and those things, but to think also how bone can be affected and why it's so important to reduce those exposures wherever we can.
Hey, Margie here. As a physical therapist, I know firsthand how important exercise is for our bones, overall health, and happiness. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion on what exercises are safe and effective for people with osteoporosis. That's why I created this handout that contains a 30-minute video where I explain the concepts so you understand the do's and don'ts when it comes to exercise. And this is important because this way you can go into any class and know what you should be doing and what you should avoid. Because too many people are doing exercises that actually increase their risk of spinal fractures. I also included videos of me demonstrating effective balance, posture, and weight-bearing exercises you can put into your day right away. So all you need to do to access this handout, it's free, is go to tinyurl.com/osteoporosis exercises. So it's tinyurl.com, again, /osteoporosis exercises, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now back to the show. Yeah, and all the root causes of osteoporosis are all negatively affected by these chemicals as well, and I don't think most people appreciate that.
Yeah, and even, when it comes to mechanism, which I didn't know when we were going to get into that, but not just the signaling issues of what travels through our system, but chemicals can also affect directly the gut microbiome. And in terms of the microbes, the thousands, actually, there's trillions of microbes, a couple thousand species that live in 26 feet of bowel that we all have. Even kids have 22 feet of bowel. And those microbes almost weigh 5 pounds, believe it or not, and it's mold, yeast, bacteria, viruses, all within us for millions of years in proper balance. And what we've seen now with many of the chemicals that are in drinking water, believe it or not, well water or municipal tap, what we've seen with even microplastic exposure, what we've seen with processed foods, with all of those chemicals that have their own particular properties, is that there can be a direct effects on the microbiome itself and knocking off the good guys, essentially. And we need the good guys because the good guys are the ones that are helpful in getting nutrition out of food, the calcium, the vitamin D, that protect the gut for absorption of our supplements if we have them, that are managed by stress. And so when you protect your gut microbiome, including removing some of those harmful toxins, those chemicals, you're really also helping all of these physiologic processes do their job and work properly.
So, you've been a practicing rheumatologist for quite a while. And what have you seen? I think it's interesting because you bring a different perspective. There's a lot of people that teach toxins, but they're not a physician working with people every day who have issues with inflammation and their immune system. What have you seen? Because a lot of times this is a very difficult conversation. There's so many things people want to do and they want to help themselves. They're like, "Oh, come on. How could this make such a big effect?"
Yeah, and it's because I'm now a practicing physician for 22 years. I've had enough opportunity to, try out my conversation and see where people are at for so many years that I've gotten a feel for what resonates and what doesn't. And I also really wanted to put together in this book a 21-day plan because I figured at this point I have now learned enough hacks and practical tips and great information where kind of the effort to benefit ratio has been really reduced, that we can do a lot with very little effort to do a lot of health benefits. And that is exactly what I put into the book, all the hacks that people need to, live life in, as mere mortals like myself, with kids going to sports and, travel, or, cleaning services, and understanding how an office works in terms of the chemicals that are left and used and sprayed in an office or your home. All of these things. I color my hair, my kids play lacrosse on turf, so I really am speaking from my own experience throughout this whole journey. And it applies to really, I think, a lot of people when it comes to just doing very, very basic changes at their own pace, their own journey, but at least to have the reason why it matters. Because if people don't get fed the why as a physician, as a researcher for a lot of years, trying to get this all correct as much as I can, if people don't know the why, they're not invested in the what. And I think telling people which brands to buy is a mistake because brands change, ownership, formulations. I think telling people where to shop specifically. I think you need to know how to look things up on your own with free apps. I think you need to understand a lot of this stuff on our own because no one is going to do the regulations. And then you have control over your own choices for yourself and your family. And so that's kind of how I built it into the book. And as a physician, to your point, this perspective is very unique. I also wrote this book at this time in my life because I think, having watched younger people get sicker at ages that you would never expect. And I'm talking rheumatoid, lupus, a whole bunch of autoimmune diseases, a bunch of skin related issues, eczema, psoriasis, food allergies, things that affect the immune system, but not necessarily autoimmune in general. But the idea is that we're getting sicker younger, and this is what the literature shows, the medical literature shows, and we're also getting sicker without any family history. So these are what we call de novo cases, new onset cases with no family history, which plays into the argument that environment has a lot to do with why that's happening. And I wanted people to really understand that what you're doing is not just staving off diseases down the line, but it's also managing rheumatoid and inflammation and managing Parkinson's and managing things that people also already have, staying in remission, those kind of things. And those were really important issues for me, to make sure that everyone was reached in the messaging.
And have you seen that in your practice? Because you've been doing this now, integrating this piece. Have you been seeing this makes a big difference?
Absolutely, and I don't think I would have had the confidence to write a book and literally describes very common patients in my practice that come through rheumatoid inflammation, diagnosis and flare. Fatigue is one of the patients that I talk about in terms of his chemical exposures and how we figured it out. I think if it was not working, I would not be practicing in the way I'm practicing. But, I do an environmental health history as part of anything I would do in terms of a medication history or a past medical history or a social history. You need to know what people are eating, drinking, where they're spending their time, what they're breathing, and occupational exposures, stress levels, their sleep levels. You really want to know that because guess what? Those are all places that we can intervene by reading the book, by listening to myself and other colleagues. We can intervene to really reduce exposures, even by how much we sleep at night and the quality of our sleep, because we wash out a lot of chemicals while we sleep. So, knowing that, it really pushes people to improve lifestyle wherever they can.
I couldn't agree more. I'm such a big believer in knowledge is power, and you have to know that underlying why. Otherwise, with anything, you're not going to really put your all into it if someone just told you to do that. But in the book, well, let's go through this because what I love that 50, I think it's 50 questions, the 50 questions that you ask, which is quite in detail, but it's a good way because people always think, well, how do I have any idea if I'm exposed or if this affects me? But that's part of your 4 A's, you call it. And I think that's a good way because truly it's overwhelming. If you say to someone, toxins or this and that, they're like, I can't, I'm doing too much already. I'm working on my exercise, my diet. I can't deal with that. And
Right.
that's what I hear a lot. They're already in overwhelm. No, no, no. I'll deal with this later on. But the way you present it, you can deal with it very easily, one step at a time. So why don't you start with the 4 A's? Because I think that's you have to what I thought it was very interesting after reading your book and listening to it. I did it 2 ways. I did it on Kindle and I did it in the car, in the audio, which I like because 'cause you're speaking, so it's sort of a good way to hear things. But
I'll
anyway,
tell that to my teenagers. They don't want to hear my voice. So,
but
no, but I'm glad some people like that. Audio is wonderful. And I think it worked out really well, even though it was the first time I ever did that. But I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, Margie. You want to finish your
I
thought?
well, all I wanted to say about the 4 A's is a lot of times people jump to the 3rd step of that. They don't do it in that order. They just automatically go to, "Okay, let's test," and, so sometimes it's not done in that order, but I think after reading this, I thought, "You know what? That's like a great way to look at things." So you wanna just share what the 4 A's are and the order it goes in?
Yeah, so the 4 A's was really designed because here at this point, again, 15 years into this, and teaching high school students, middle school students, even up to programs for doctors, believe it or not, it's the same material. It's just how you frame it. And what I've realized is that you have to piece it out in a kind of in a way that makes sense to people in a very reasonable, tangible way, right? Big topic. So the 4 A's are number one, assess. You want to know where you're starting from. You want to know what the problem is or how many, exposures you're getting or from where to begin with. So you just know how to get started. So there's a 50 question survey. And it's very basic. It's very reasonable. Do you dry clean your clothes? Yes or no? Put a 1 or 0. Do you, look up your cosmetics for chemicals on any of the apps? Is 1 or 0? And you kind of, they're not crazy questions. They're not meant to be judgmental. They're meant to just give someone a standing of where they start. I can assure you my numbers were very different 15 years ago. I just don't want people to take 15 years to get to where I am. And then basically knowing those numbers, you can kind of figure out where to make the inroads to the second A, which is avoid or swap. So you have assess. And now as you go through, even the 21-day plan is broken up. First week is assess, second week is is avoid or swap, which means you can reduce the total number of products you use like cleaning products are one example of a great way to reduce. You save money. You also don't bring in lots of chemicals that are found in cleaning products, colors, perfumes, phthalates, a bunch of things that are very harmful to the human body. Even pesticide technically are in a lot of cleaning products because they clean off bugs, right? They're antimicrobial. So avoiding or swapping is taking down the number if you can do that, if you want to do that. And swapping is switching to things that are just cleaner versions of what you don't want to take out of your life. And that has a lot to do with resources. What do you look up for makeup, for cosmetics, personal care, body sprays? My kids are into this. And they look up their stuff and make cleaner changes. The third A of the four A's is add. And add is this really important piece where no matter how much chemicals you take out of your life, you still have to add into the human body nutrients, healthy sleep, exercise, and why. Which kinds of foods help make the liver churn up those toxins more efficiently. But you want to add this piece in. It's very anthropologic. It's really a big piece of how our body is strengthened enough to detoxify in the first place. But it's really very basic anthropology and evolution. And the fourth A is allow. And I think that this is the piece that I learned over a lot of years taking care of patients and also my own choices. You want to have an allow because there's no perfection here. I don't go for perfection, clearly. I am talking to people about getting 80-20 at best. That thinking about high yield intervention. So allow is the birthday cake, it's travel, it's plastic water bottles when you don't have access to your own filter from home. It's about having that flexibility through life and its fluidity to not always be perfect when, for any number of reasons. And so that allows people, I think, to do more good than to kind of throw up their hands and say, forget about it. And this process, I think, has been really resonating. I mean, I've gotten so much more feedback about the 21-day plan and the four A's than almost anything, even though there's other stuff in there. But I think it's a hand holding of this big topic in a very reasonable way. And, hopefully your audience will find that as well.
Yeah, that's what I found because it is an overwhelming topic, and these steps were very, very doable, and as you said, perfection. We all have the ability to there's just toxins, we're not gonna get rid of everything, and then the stress that goes along with that isn't worth it. So it's a real balancing act and one step at a time, but it was doable. I thought the way you broke it down was really great, and I thought that, you know what? People can do this, and it's 21 days. It's just unlike other things where you tell them all, "Okay, I have to change my pants, I have to change this, I have to change that." Ah,
Yeah,
it's like, "Okay, we can start here, step 1, then we can move."
right.
I found that in my own life. I mean, years ago, I started, really studying toxins, and one step at a time worked. That really, I live a very toxin-free life right now, and it doesn't seem hard at all now, but, it was a gradual thing.
And it's cost, from a cost perspective, I'm very conscious of people's finances, really super conscious, even with my own patients. And, I wanted, over the years, I went from, should we be testing every patient for all the chemicals that we have, available to test? Or should we be, worrying so much about every chemical in our home and testing things within our home? I really wanted people to stop testing so much and really put the money that they would spend on thousands of dollars of a variety of tests from both the health and wellness industry or even, other areas in and put it into the doing, into the solutions. And I think that's been very appropriate. Now, some people have bigger issues than just, low level exposures and really have major symptoms. And that's addressed in the book too. But for most of us who don't have anything flashing in their faces or major rashes or something that they can identify as a cause and effect exposure, it's really low level stuff. And it's better to just do the work than it is to test any number of chemicals in your water. Or, I have all those resources. People will be able to know which places are vetted and what to do and how to test water and how to test your blood, even using your insurance. But I want people to focus more on the doing than in the testing.
All right. So on that note, in terms of the doing, so for the bones, what would you say? Let's start with what we have to avoid. What are the main things that you think people should start? Where would you start?
Yeah. So I would start, first of all, with the high yield exposures to the human body, right? This kind of makes sense. What do we do the most of that gets into our bodies? And I would say food and water are so critical because there's, again, thousands of chemicals. We're not going to be able to test or know which ones are coming in our bodies at any given moment. Life is variable. You go out to dinner, you go at this, but the idea is that if you can try in your home and your workspace or whatever you have more control over, to really think about the quality of food, reducing ultra processed foods, which have, any number of the 12,000 chemicals that are allowable in the food industry, right? Without any testing or safety, which we know a lot about. You want to think about cleaner whole foods, right? Mediterranean diet. You want to be thinking about more plant based. You want to think, I mean, there's plenty of calcium and vitamin D and in those foods, but certainly the gut microbiome helps to make vitamin K naturally. So we want that gut health to be really as strong as we can keep it or get it. And so high quality food. I also really want people to consider the pesticides that are even in our whole foods, like our produce. And one of the ways to really, in a cheaper way to do this, is either grow your own food, which not everyone can do, certainly, but really thinking about frozen USDA organic foods, which, organic is such an important designation. I can't stress this enough. It is the only regulation that we have available in the US food system, and it's not perfect, but it really cuts down the use of thousands of fertilizer chemicals and pesticide chemicals in the produce that is grown in organic soil and designated as certified organic. And so frozen USDA organics in the bags, yes, they're in plastic, you can remove them, but those are actually twofold beneficial because not only do you have the lesser of the pesticides that are, not allowed in that produce, but also you have high nutrient value because all of that produce is flash frozen once it's picked. So it really, in many ways, in my opinion, having gone all over the country and checked all the supermarkets, each supermarket chain really does make their own set of organic frozen foods. And it has sort of democratized the availability of clean food in a way that I don't think fresh food allows in the food system in terms of access. So frozen organics are great. If you don't have access to organic produce, then do conventional, but wash with white vinegar, 1 part to 3 parts water, or baking soda takes a lot of those pesticide residues off. And that way it won't affect your gut microbiome, which are microbes, right? We think about killing off bacteria in the fields, but we want to, or herb, or weeds or what have you, but we also don't want to kill off the microbes in the gut. So that's where that whole pesticide conversation is important. And then the second piece that's really high yield is thinking about water. And I talk about water in its own chapter because it's so important that filtering your drinking water, no matter what type of filtration, is better than nothing, whether it's municipal tap or well water. They both have their issues, certainly. But when you're filtering your water, there's so much cheaper, great filters out there. I talk a lot about reverse osmosis that are much more accessible than they've ever been. They're about $275, and you can get one on your counter. You can get one under your kitchen sink. And a plumber is like $150 to put it in 1 hour, and it's good for many years. So the idea that you can upfront, your cost for a water filter in a way that's reasonable and yet not have to buy plastic water bottles and plastic, microplastic issues, and tap water that's often in those bottles really does make a lot of sense. But those are the two high yields, high intakes into the body. We also have things that absorb through the skin and the vaginal canal, like feminine care products and personal care products. So swapping out some of your favorite stuff to safer versions is a really great start. And then in the kitchen, even easier, swap out your pans from, nonstick to stainless steel, use glass for storage, glass for carrying things like drinking water, using stainless steel, materials that don't break off and leach into the substances that they're carrying.
And let's delve a little more into the water because I know this is something that you feel so strongly about. So, because a lot of people will say, oh, they are told, I don't need a water filter because our municipal water is just excellent. It's high quality. What do you say to that person? Are there some amazing waters that really don't benefit from? I have an osmotic filtration. I've had it for, oh gosh, 37 years, I think.
You're ahead of the game.
Yeah, the first thing I did when I moved in my house was get the, that was one of the first things I did, but in terms of, a lot of people say, "Oh, we don't need to do that. We have really good," especially in New York, where I live not far from you in New Jersey, but in a lot of areas in New York, we have, like, amazing water. We really don't need that.
Yeah,
That's
I actually make a joke about that because I used to live in New York and how everyone thinks New York water makes the bagel so fantastic, better than anywhere else in the country. Well, here is the myth busting commentary, I would say, is that people don't really understand, I didn't certainly, about the water system that we drink from as municipal tap, city water. It serves 85% of the US population, and there's about 160,000 of these wastewater treatment plants that are scattered around the country. Wells really serve 15% of the US population, more in the rural areas, more away from cities. And under the what's called the Safe Drinking Water Act from 1974, 50 years ago, 51 years ago, is the same law that covers all of these wastewater treatment plants in all states across the country. And what it says is that we will only look at and evaluate and test for and fix 91 chemicals of the thousands that can actually get into our water system, our treatment plants that go out to your homes. And that water comes in from lakes and streams and aquifers. It comes from sewage. It comes from manufacturing runoff. It comes from problems in the air that consolidate into bodies of water that go into these wastewater treatment plants. But guess what? Only 91 chemicals under this law are managed. And all those other chemicals go right in from the front and go right out the back to your home. Plus, it travels through PVC piping, lead piping, sometimes 30, 40 miles to get to your home as municipal tap water. Okay. So the idea that any one state has better water than another is only limited by which other chemicals are in there, but certainly not the 91 that we know, like arsenic and benzene and a couple others. Even lead has an upper limit, but it's still allowable to a certain degree in our drinking water and our tap water. So um, we have a big problem with our water system and an infrastructure that hasn't changed in 50 years and laws that haven't changed. And anytime there's a push to regulate more chemicals that we know are in our drinking water, that we know are harmful to human health, there's always industry pushback because that means regulations have to go all the way through to the manufacturers who make these chemicals and end up in our waterways. So our job, I believe, is not to wait for those regulations or any one or two chemicals to be added to that 91 list and really do it for ourselves because the chemicals will be different no matter where you live. In the middle of the country, lots more pesticides because it's the farm belt. It's the Iowas and Kansas and all of that. Seasonally, these chemicals will change. With flooding and any climate change issues, the chemicals that make their way into water will change. And so the only way to have a control over that is to control the quality of your water once it hits your home. And that's the point of use when it right before it hits your glass. And to me, that has been the most eye-opening of any component of human health, bone health, you name any part of the human body, any illness and any kind of reduced risk. And I will tell you that water probably is the most under-recognized contributor to that. So this is how I would say to fix it, and then carry your water in glass and stainless steel. It's so much cheaper than what most people consider safe and effective, like plastic water bottle delivery or schlepping them home, or, even pitcher filters, which are fair but not great. I encourage any filtration, but I think for the cost of those drop-ins, you can certainly get a reverse osmosis now with the cost of them.
And if people wanted to test their water, what's the cheapest, best way? I know you have this in the book, but what for people listening, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so testing water, there's third party. You don't want to actually test your water with the same company that wants to put in a whole house filter, in my opinion, because I think that muddies the water there. But I'm not saying there's anything malicious, but I think that having a separate third party testing kit like Tap Score is in the book. But they run at this point still about $300 for a very reasonable but good test. I mean, it covers a lot of chemicals, not going to cover 95,000. But the idea that you could take that 300 and just buy an RO filter and not worry about what's in your water as much, I think makes a lot more sense to me. But people who want to do that, certainly I've done the work where I pre and post test a lot of filters. They send them to me, and I don't endorse any brands or anything of the sort. I just kind of teach that to my patients and can use that for other things. But I think it's really important to know that reverse osmosis is the only technology that really, by a pore size, catches everything. It's like a strainer, to be very simplistic about it. And so it's going to catch even the smallest viruses and bacteria, which is how it was designed back in the 70s for dialysis patients. My dad's a kidney specialist and my brother and they designed rooms, and there's still now room full of RO filtration for dialysis units. It's that important and that extensive to prevent infection in these folks because they're immune compromised. And so they were designed originally just to catch the smallest single-celled organisms like viruses and bacteria. What they didn't realize in the 70s is that that filtration pore size would catch everything bigger, every compound that was created that's bigger than those, which is the plastic chemicals, the PFAS chemicals, lead to a certain degree, certain other components that reverse osmosis does a great job of doing. And so I think when people think about it as a strainer and what a change out looks like, looks like mud in my house, you realize that all that can't be good for the human body, and it's good to really filter it out when you can.
Yeah, no, that's so great. A lot of times people ask me the question, so I'll ask this to you. If you're using the osmotic filtration and you have a good diet, do you feel that you need to add any more minerals to your water?
I will say wholeheartedly, no. Water is not ever and has never been considered a source of nutrition for the human body. Just plain and simple. And the limited amount of minerals that you might get from water, you actually will get far more from a really well-rounded Mediterranean plant-based, diet. As I mentioned, frozen organics are great. Farmers markets now are fantastic when they're picked right out of the soil. We want to get our nutrition from food, and we want our water to be clean. Just by mere volume of how much we drink, you're never going to get a benefit of minerals to chemical ratio. You're not going to ever get that. So you actually have to sort of clean the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the process of water cleaning. And it's never served, in terms of health issues. I've been using RO water religiously, I guess, for 25 years now. And my teeth haven't fallen out. And, I don't see, I mean, hopefully, I'm not wrong on this, but I don't see any issue other than, really just remembering that water makes up 85 to 90% of the human body. And if we don't get that right, I think, in terms of even muscle strength around bones and bone tissue, we need water as human beings.
Yeah, no, I think this is just so important. But I just wanted, because you really are an expert at this, and I know that you're so passionate about the water. Just a few things. Okay, so now you go to a restaurant. What's your choice? I know what you do, but just talk about
Yeah.
the
No,
choice.
this is great, great question because I often will bring my water to restaurants if I can remember, and it doesn't even phase me. It's just 20 ounces, not a big bottle. I don't take my huge ones. I have big ones for my tea, that are insulated, so it keeps my tea hot all day. But yeah, I've invested in some really just a bunch of glass bottles. And I'll take it wherever I can go. In fact, I have lacrosse tournaments pretty much for the next 8 weeks of the summer, and they're weekend long. And I have a 3-gallon stainless steel canister that I fill up, and it's good for the whole weekend. I mean, it's fantastic not to have to drink microplastics. Now there's a lot of attention on that. My kids used to, they still do drink a lot of water bottles that are from plastic, and I'm trying to encourage them to get into a culture of not needing that as much. It's not perfection, trust me. But other things to think about when I go to the airport, if people want to follow me on The Smart Human, which is my platform, The Smart Human, on Instagram, I'll often be in an airport and I'll be walking around showing sort of the different choices that are available, and that people don't really even realize that even if you don't have your water bottle, which I carry, I empty out before security so they don't steal or take my, not steal, but take my bottle, which is, very, kind of expensive if it's insulated. I carry with that throughout my trips because you can either fill it up with tea or coffee, or you can fill up at Starbucks in anywhere you go or in the airport. And you can use it for water when you're not using it for tea or coffee. So that's a really cool vessel that keeps plastics from getting into your water. I also teach people that there's a filter in most airports that's a carbon block, similar to a refrigerator door or a faucet or a pitcher, carbon block, and you can actually just fill up with water there. And even if it's not reverse osmosis, it's a wonderful way to reduce microplastics and cost. And then you can also just choose plastic water bottles and look at the ingredients. Believe it or not, water bottles with water have ingredient section where you it will tell you how that water has been cleaned or not. And so when it says distilled, distilled to me means heating up to high temperature and killing off bacteria and viruses, which is great, but it won't do anything to plastic compounds or perfluoroalkyls or any of these hardier compounds that are synthetic. So I choose reverse osmosis on the ingredients label, and that's a choice anyone can make.
Oh, and you'll actually see that? So when you're looking at the plastic water bottle, it will say
Yep.
reverse osmosis? Oh,
Yeah,
that's so
I reverse osmosis, yep, or
oh,
distilled, or the gall of municipal tap. I mean, I actually had a bottle, I remember in a hotel that was said municipal tap on the ingredients, and you're like, "Well, I could have gotten that in my hotel room if I just, put my bottle under the sink tap," you know? So, I think, knowing that that's even there gives you more options than not, for sure.
sometimes it just says spring water. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, spring water is us all trying to be nostalgic, and it's kind of like the milk cartons that have the farm and the cow grazing when it's like a mass industry of, horrible stuff that you can't even imagine. It's this idyllic nature that spring water is so clean and it's coming from some far off spring that nothing has touched. In fact, there are studies in the backwoods of Maine that exposure to these chemicals make their way through air, that make their way through water systems. There's studies, of course, many have heard of that even in the North and South poles when they look at whale blubber, that there's chemicals in there that don't even make their way up there, but make their way through the air currents. And so there's really no, I would say spring water to me is a lot of greenwashing, and that springs no longer can be really verified for their cleanliness, at least not in the way that consumers would be available to know.
Oh, so interesting. And so when you're at a restaurant and you have an option, let's say you don't bring your water with you, you have an option of the tap water or their bottled water. Is one
Yeah,
of
well, I choose bottled water over tap. Maybe I'll have a beer instead and avoid my water for the moment. But the idea or wine, whatever, and I even buy organic beer and wine, believe it or not. I talk about that in the book, but, because again, life is life. You wanna have quality of life. You don't have to be so restrictive in certain things. It's your choice. But, when I choose bottled water and they come over with a glass bottle of water, I, like, almost start crying because it's like an endangered species, any water in glass. Like, even Whole Foods and some of these big box stores don't carry even glass bottles anymore of water. And, it makes me sad because I don't even organic canned foods are, in cans with BPA. Like it's really hard, I think, for people to wrap their heads around, but I'm trying to in the book that our packaging of our food is another layer of getting into this topic. It may not be now, it may be at another time, but the packaging of our food and how we handle our food packaging, whether we heat up in plastics or not, makes a big difference into how much contamination gets into that food. Even if the food is organic and clean and blah, blah, blah. Food packaging, I have in the book, the detoxify food pyramid, and what I did was I did a play off of, Dr. Andrew Weil's anti-inflammatory pyramid and Mark Hyman's Pegan pyramid. Basically, it's a Mediterranean diet, of sorts, lots of vegetables on the bottom and making its way up to clean protein. And then at the very top, you have alcohol, cheese, wine, whatever, all the goodies in limited amounts. But what I wanted to layer on is other things like detoxifying activities that help us remove chemicals. So sleep and exercise is on the very bottom. Then there's water. I don't know which one's first. I can't remember. I think it's food packaging. Yeah, food packaging with the different types of packaging and what to think about and how to figure out which ones are better and how to choose them properly if you want to. Then water, and then the food pyramid. And all along the sides, I'm talking about organic whenever possible. And it's a really just a different way of reframing what we ingest and how there's more than just macros of fats, carbs, and protein to our decision making should you choose to have that information.
yeah, I love that. And, I mean, we could go on and on, but I do have one other water question.
Of
So
course.
No, just because a lot of people, and I know the answer to this, but I just want to share because I think people that are thinking, okay, well, what about my shower? How much do I have to spend on the shower? So I don't, because I know you have a economical way to do the shower.
Yeah, so I learned this along the way from even a colleague of mine, but the shower heads, you can actually put a carbon block shower head on for like $20, maybe they're $25 now at, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. It's funny that even the people that work there don't even know where to find them. Like you could run around the store for an hour and then it's like on the bottom corner and it's literally a shower head that inside is a carbon block and then there's cartridges you can change out and you can basically have a filtered shower head. It's not going to be reverse osmosis just by the mere pressure issues because most people with reverse osmosis, you're making water while you sleep. It's very low. It covers a lot of surface area, all the canisters goes into a tank, and that's what you're going to draw off of as it fills. But when in a shower and in a pitcher, it's all about convenience. It's how fast the water goes through. And so that's much more limited in what it can remove just from a physics property. And so, yeah, the shower heads are going to be moving faster because you're in a shower, but really nice way to save a lot of money by keeping your showers a little cleaner in terms of water and vapor, and then having most of your water controlled for food and drinking at your kitchen sink for much lower cost.
Yeah, no, that's so great. I know he spends a lot of time in water, but I think this is so important. And as you make a big deal about, it really is a lot of what we eat and what we drink and a part of everybody's everyday life. And so if we can even, dial that down and make the changes, and as you said, it's not that expensive. So I think that's just, such a win-win. So what else do you want to share? There's so many things to share. The book is really great and it gives you, it just does a step by step, which I think's so wonderful and so helpful. And I think part of the reason I wanted you back was to bring this conversation, realize this matters. This matters. This is going to really affect your bones, your overall health, and it's so doable. And it's not something to just say, "Oh, I'll get to it at some point."
Yeah, in terms of bones, I mean, to give your audience, I know that's why they're really paying attention here. And I want to make sure that they understand a couple things about bones. Certainly I'm never going to discount the activity and the physical weight bearing activities of forces up the femur to strengthen the hips. But I also want to circle back also to the gut microbiome. There's so many interesting studies where taking probiotic rich foods really supports the gut, which makes the whole body healthy. So I have a whole chapter on the ad component, but really talking about supplements and which ones are high yield and important and why brands matter and what you should be looking for in a probiotic and what matters about how it's even packaged and shipped to a store in terms of its whether they're alive or dead and how those probiotics help the gut, defend against all sorts of things. There's also, discussion there briefly, I believe about medications in terms of thinking about medications. And as it pertains to bones, there's certain medications that we have to be on because they're life saving. But there's a lot of medications that are not so necessary on a routine basis. We need to ask our practitioners. But one class like proton pump inhibitors, which are typically used for, low level reflux, not, severe cases, those actually work against the gut microbiome in terms of not just knocking off the microbes that absorb calcium and vitamin D and all these nutritious foods and supplements we're trying to take in. So we want to be thinking about the medications we're on, specifically the ones that have higher rates of osteoporotic fractures from long-term use. And those were discovered as the proton pump inhibitors, for example. So yeah, thinking about those aspects of nutrition in managing medications, being judicious about them, understanding how and when to be on them, how long, what are the outcomes, what's the success criteria for success for those drugs, and whether there's alternatives that can be safer for the gut, which will be better for the bones as well.
Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough. And how would you like to leave everybody? Do you have any last minute things that you want to just end with?
Oh gosh. I want to end with the fact that this is a really, again, to reiterate your point, my point earlier, is that this is a big topic. I think it's shocking for a lot of people. It's not meant to scare people, it's meant to empower people. And I think that having the tools, the right resources, again, no brands, no endorsements, makes it clean messaging. I teach high school and college. I teach other physicians at 3 different training programs that I created their environmental health curriculum. So I really believe that the material I'm sharing is evidence-based, and there's 40 pages of references for the book. And so it's really, I think, a good resource for yourself, but also even sharing with family members. If you're a teacher, if you're in the educational world, please share it with your classroom. This is how education makes its way into real practical, livable um, world, and the goal is to keep people healthy, keep their immune system in check, to manage diseases that we may already have and keep them quiet. And so that was my goal. And I appreciate you sharing this. And I post a lot on, again, the Smart Human is my platform. The smarthuman.com has even courses if people want to take for, EMF radiation is a small course, pesticides is a small course, a detoxify course. So I encourage people, if they're interested, to even look into those courses, and follow on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, my podcast, which I have environmental health doctors and researchers. So whatever people are interested in, I hope they find it useful.
One other thing, are you still working with people one-on-one?
Yeah, yeah. I'm in Princeton. I always seem to forget that I'm an actual doctor, but I'm here in my office. I live here basically, but I'm in my office in Princeton, and I do see patients still, new patients. But I also do telemedicine consults for patients across any, in any state. But I can't prescribe or order labs or medicines. But a lot of times, consults are what people are hoping to hear anyway, especially in the bone health world. So, whatever people are interested in, and I even see kids as consults, believe it or not, because there's so many people that need just a good triage process. So, feel free to reach out if you're interested, and I'm online at alycohenmd.com.
Oh, I love this, Ailey. And the fact that you're an integrative rheumatologist and you also do environmental medicine and, you put a lot of the pieces together that I think are components of just a healthy lifestyle and help with, I always believe in digging deep and
Yeah.
figuring out what's going on. So, I
Sure.
think all these are so important. Well, it's always a pleasure to see you. Good luck with the book. I think it's wonderful and such a good roadmap for people. So
Check it out. And if you guys are, if you like what I wrote, please throw up a good review and keep this education going. It's a ripple effect. And I always stress this, this is how we keep people healthy in our family and our friends, is that we keep on, this conversation keeps going. And, it's gotten a lot more attention now than it's ever gotten. And so I hope people will not, do too much TikTok purchasing, and kind of think about like good, clean choices and practical ways to do this and not be impulsive, which we all manage. So, all good. Thank you for having me, Margie. And thank you for sharing me with your audience. I appreciate it.
oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Cohen as much as I did. And now, some practical ways that you can reduce the toxins that you're exposed to on a daily basis. And this will make a big difference for your bones and overall health. All the links Dr. Cohen talked about will be in the show notes, including the link to her new book, Detoxify, which I'm a big fan of. And it really gives you a roadmap to ways that you can reduce the toxins and detoxify, and that's doable and sustainable. So all of that will be in the show notes, and thank you again for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, because that way you'll get notification of new episodes, as well as it helps spread the information in this podcast to others. So thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.